Entering into its third decade, Universal Orlando Resort would once again host the world's premier Halloween event, Halloween Horror Nights, for the 30th year in a row. Reaching another monumentous milestone year, the event was set to bring all new scares and thrills, as guests would face some of the most popular horror intellectual properties and original concepts, all while celebrating 30 years of fear. Welcome to the 30th anniversary of Halloween Horror Nights. There is only one rule to this celebration: never go alone. This is SP History. In creating the 30th Halloween Horror Nights event, Universal Creative would set out to continue its decade-long marketing strategy by incorporating major horror IPs into their highly elaborate haunted houses and scare zones, all while developing new original concepts to terrify the most frightened. In November of 2019, after the conclusion of Halloween Horror Nights 29, Universal would announce the dates for its 30th anniversary to initially run from September 10th to October 31st of 2020, but would then be extended to November 1st. Plans would be set, and construction would begin in the months leading to the September 10th start date. But in similar circumstances to the 2001 event, a global crisis would alter this event forever. In early 2020, the world would be stricken by one of the worst health crises in our history with the coronavirus pandemic, as many people were affected by the disease, which forced many businesses to close to curb its spread. Universal Orlando Resort would be one of those businesses, as they would officially close on March 16th and wouldn't reopen until June 5th, an almost 3 months closure, the longest in the resort's history. With the reopening of the resort, many new health guidelines would be implemented to provide a safe experience for guests, such as capacity limits and social distancing, which would have many questioning if Halloween Horror Nights 30 would still be held with these same guidelines. This would then be answered on July 24th, 2020, as the resort would officially announce that the event would be postponed to 2021, as they would focus on continuing operating the parks in a safe manner in such an unprecedented time. Though having canceled its marquee event, Universal would still treat guests with Halloween offerings for the year, as it would open some of the experiences that have been a part of the 30th anniversary, including 2 ghoulish original houses. The 2020 Halloween experiences would run during normal park hours from September 19th through November 1st, and included the Halloween Horror Nights Tribute Store, selling merchandise that would celebrate 30 years of the premiere event and its offerings, a themed bar called the Skeleton Bar, located in the Cafe La Bamba, and a Scarecrow Stalk Scavenger Hunt, where many different themed Scarecrow figures would be placed in attraction gift shops. But the main offerings would be 2 terrifying original haunted houses, which were originally planned to debut in this year's scrapped event. The first house would be located within Soundstage 23 and be a sequel to 2019's Universal Monsters, as this iteration would be called Universal Monsters: The Bride of Frankenstein Lives. Within, guests would arrive at the destruction of Dr. Frankenstein's castle, as his monster has been fatally wounded from the rubble, leaving his other creation, the Bride, distraught and mad, as she would attempt to resurrect her undead partner once again using the Brides of Dracula, all while guests try to escape from their deadly grasp. For guests to safely experience this house, many health precautions would be placed within, as vinyl dividers would be installed throughout to separate guests from the actors inside, and social distancing would be enforced, which would be within all the houses during the season. The second house would be placed inside Soundstage 24 and feature a twisted version of a classic folklore, as it would be titled Revenge of the Tooth Fairy. Here, Guests enter a disturbed fairy tale where they follow James Westthorne, an unruly child who makes an unforgivable decision, not leaving his fallen teeth to the Tooth Fairies, who now wreak havoc upon his family, suffering the cruelest consequences, with guests caught in the middle, looking to be unscathed upon the horror within. This house was planned to be a part of the 2019 event, but would later be altered to be one of the main IP offerings of that year, Jordan Peele's Us. Though these were the main houses featured during the 2020 fall season, a surprise third house would open during the final weekend of the offerings, being in the original Parade Warehouse and being an IP house based on the 1988 Tim Burton film Beetlejuice, as it shared the same title. Within, guests get to experience the wacky events of the film as they meet the eccentric bioexorcist and sends them to a colorful world of ghoulish fun and madness. The reasoning behind this house opening late in the run was due to contractual obligations requiring the house to open during a small period of time, which would delight many guests who were able to experience it. The 2020 Halloween experience at Universal Orlando was a happy surprise to many guests who were visiting the parks during this difficult time, allowing visitors to celebrate the Halloween season and take a break from real-world issues that plagued the world at the time. Entering 2021, Universal was set to have Halloween Horror Nights return in its entirety to finally celebrate its 30th anniversary, touting to never go alone. The event's plan and marketing were set to remain mostly the same, though there were some changes that would be seen throughout. Additionally, Universal would still implement health guidelines at the event, as vinyl barriers would still be in all the houses, still focusing to provide a safe, fun space for all who would visit. But to commemorate the occasion, the event would need an icon to bring in all 30 years of fear back to Universal Studios Florida, and there would be no one else better for the job than the ultimate icon, the sinister Jack the Clown. Jack would finally return to the event after a 6-year absence to ring in the anniversary celebration, as all 3 versions of the maniacal clown would be featured in the event. His original iteration, Ringmaster Jack, and the leader of Jack's Maniacs version would be featured throughout the event, as this year would truly be jacked up and no one would be able to escape his terror. Jack wouldn't forget to bring some gifts, however, as he would bring some of the most terrifying horror intellectual properties to life in this year's haunted house lineup. For instance, Universal would once again team up with streaming service Netflix to create a house based on another popular horror television series, The Haunting of Hill House. Other IPs to be featured would be returns of classics such as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Beetlejuice. With no further delays, Halloween Horror Nights 30 would run for 43 nights from between September to October, one more night than the 2019 event, and include the regular batch of 10 haunted houses, 5 scare zones, and 2 shows, as guests would finally get to experience 30 years, 30 fears of Halloween Horror Nights history. Beginning to discuss the haunted houses at this year's event, it would be a combination of IP adaptations and original concepts that featured Horror Nights throwbacks. The first house would be located inside Soundstage 23 and see the return of one of the 3 houses that debuted at the 2020 Halloween Experiences, Universal Monsters: The Bride of Frankenstein Lives. Within, guests would once again enter the world of the classic monsters as the bride tries to resurrect her undead counterpart, all while guests endure all the evil inside. This house will see minor changes from its first iteration, as there would be added actors and sets within. The next house would also be within Soundstage 23 and be another adaptation of a classic slasher film series, as it would be called The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Being the third house based on the IP, guests would again enter the Sawyer family home, where all types of grotesque evil is inside as the maniacal Leatherface seeks fresh meat. This house would be different from the last two previous iterations, as rather being a direct adaptation, it would take place 4 years after the first film. The third house would be placed inside Soundstage 24 and be the second house to return from the 2020 fall season, as it would again be called Revenge of the Tooth Fairy. Guests would again enter the twisted fairy tale as they witness the gruesome acts inflicted by a pack of vengeful tooth fairies upon the West Thorne family. Like Universal Monsters' The Bride of Frankenstein Lives, the house would see minor changes from its 2020 version with added actors and props. The following house would also be inside Soundstage 24 and would feature the return of the most sinister Horror Nights original icons, as it would be titled HHN Icons Captured. Here, guests would enter Fear's Lantern, which holds many maniacal icons of Horror Nights past, becoming face to face with these evil entities in their own personal hells. Throughout each event night, the house's final scene would alter between casts, as different icons would be featured in its throne centerpiece, giving guests a different ending and repeat walkthroughs. The fifth house of the event would be featured inside the MIB tent and be another tribute house to the 30th anniversary of Horror Nights, as it would be called Welcome to Scary Horror in the Heartland. Within, guests return to the infamous Cary, Ohio, which has been the home to some of the most disturbing original stories of the past 30 years, and now all come back into one house, ready to deliver more horror and fear. Past Horror Nights originals to be featured would include houses like 2010's Havoc Dogs of War and 2009's Leave It to Cleaver, and Scare Zone Swift's 2008's The Schoolhouse, with many more. The next house would be placed in Sprung Tent 2 and be an all-new original concept featuring demented traditional Halloween creatures, as it would be called the Wicked Growth Realm of the Pumpkin. Inside here, guests enter a new domain of hell, ruled by the Pumpkin Lord, a dark bringer of evil, where his followers haunt throughout, looking to make everyone who enters one with his realm. The Wicked Growth Realm of the Pumpkin will win House of the Year for 2021. The seventh house would be located within Sprung Tent 1 and be another original concept, now featuring a troupe of evil puppeteers, as it would be titled Puppet Theater Captive Audience. Here, guests enter the Grandeur Theater, once home of the Passek puppet troupe, that is now under rubble after a massive earthquake, leaving all the troupe members crazed and ready to kill all left within in the grandest fashion. The next house would be within the second Parade Warehouse and be based off the popular Netflix TV series The Haunting of Hill House, as it shared the same title. Here, guests step right into the infamous Hill House, where many ghostly evils lurk within, looking to make all who enter eternal residents. The ninth house would be inside the original Parade Warehouse and once again feature the last of the three houses that debuted in 2020, Beetlejuice. Guests would again enter the wacky world of the 1988 horror comedy as Beetlejuice haunts and entertains throughout. This house would relatively remain the same from its 2020 debut. The final house of the event would be located within the Shrek Theater and be an original following a Horror Nights character, Boris Schuster, as it would be named Case Files Unearthed Legendary Truth. In here, guests follow the previously named private investigator from the Reflections of Fear event as they witness his many paranormal encounters with ghouls and monsters terrorizing throughout. This house is the one offering that went through many changes, as from its original conception, the house would be themed around popular artist Billie Eilish. However, this would be altered after postponement of the event in 2020. Thereafter, the theme of the house was to be changed to another IP based off the Shudder horror series Creepshow, even with some sets being built within, but this concept would then finally be altered into its final form as a completely original house. This would be the complete haunted house lineup for the 30th Halloween Horror Nights event, featuring many excellent IP adaptations and tributes to Horror Nights lore. Discussing the scare zones for this year, the 5 created would mostly consist of new and returning original concepts. The first zone would be located in Plaza of the Stars and Production Central and be a celebration of the anniversary of HHN, as it would be called 30 Years, 30 Fears. Here, guests are surrounded by 30 years of HHN terror as many monsters and maniacs return to the streets to create the ultimate Horror Nights experience. The second scare zone would be placed in the New York area of the park and be themed to a dystopian city taken over by cyber aliens, as it would be titled Seek and Destroy. In here, New York City has fallen to an alien cyber regime led by the Controller, and a being of immense influence whose followers are sent to hunt down humans for fuel, leaving anyone left alive with 2 choices: submit to the Controller or perish. The next zone would be located within the San Francisco area and feature monstrosities from the web horror series Crypt TV, as it shared the same name. Here, many creations from the series have found themselves onto the streets, and now they seek new victims to enter their dark reality. The fourth scare zone will be within the Central Park area and be the return of the 2005 sub-icon, the Terror Queen, as it would be named Gorewood Forest. Here, guests return to the world of Terra Cruentus, last seen from the Tales of Terror event, but now has found its way into Central Park as the Terror Queen looks to reshape the world in her image with all its bloody glory. The final zone would be located in the Hollywood area of the park and be a sequel featuring Jack the Clown's maniacal brother, Eddie, as it would be called Lights, Camera, Action, Eddie's Revenge. Here, guests enter a brand new film set, all led by Eddie Schmidt, the once scrapped icon, who brings many other monsters from Horror Nights past as they look to make the deadliest film in history, where the horror is real and no one survives. But like each year, entertainment offerings would be planted throughout, and this event would again consist of 2 exhilarating shows. The first show would be located in the Studio Lagoon and see the return of the 2019 offering Marathon of Mayhem, as this edition would now be called Marathon of Mayhem Carnage Factory. This year's show would take guests into a sinister factory, highlighting the event's most insidious offerings as Jack the Clown manufactures a nightmare filled with pulsing lasers and electrifying music. The final show would be held in the Fear Factor stage and be an all-new show featuring a blend of music and fire-fueled stunts, as it would be titled Halloween Nightmare Fuel. This show would invite guests to witness a waking nightmare where a group of aerialists and fire performers explore our deepest fears, all fueled by heart-pounding music. This would be all the offerings at the 30th anniversary of Halloween Horror Nights, producing frightening street scares and pulse-pounding entertainment. In review, Halloween Horror Nights 30, after all its delays and challenges, would still be able to produce an overall satisfying event, bringing to life all new intellectual properties and creating long-lasting nightmares for all who attended. But with the 30th year coming to a close, an all-new era of the world's premier Halloween event would begin, looking to create another decade of fear.